Jim of Shiloh Kahal, and I want to do a little bit of work on the Dead Sea Scrolls, not because I'm an expert, I don't pretend to be an expert, but because I have spent a lot of time in it now, more so than many can, maybe. Maybe you just don't have time or have the resources. But I've been studying and spending a lot of time, and this is after spending a lot of time studying the old writings, more so than I ever had in my life. So for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been intensively studying the scriptures, and now I've turned my attention to the Dead Sea Scrolls, having studied and learned quite a bit from the scriptures, the old writings, and now I'm discovering things as I turned toward the Dead Sea Scrolls. Let me say, from 2020 forward, as I began to become more intensely interested in my identity as Israel and what that means to me in terms of Torah and in terms of the old writings, well, one of the things that became of interest was the additional writings, the extra writings, what everybody wants to call the Apocrypha, which is, I don't like to use that name because it suggests that the books are, don't have, don't rise to the level of Scripture. Well, as I began to learn information out of those additional writings, those extra scriptures, those parabiblical writings, there's always been some question about whether or not they are legitimate, or why were they not included in the canon of 66? Well, one of the things that became prevalent as I turned my attention to the whole study was the advent of the Dead Sea Scrolls having come about, which I had always heard. I've heard for, gosh, how many years? Maybe my entire Christian life. I'm sure I have heard of it for my entire Christian life, but I really had no understanding of them. I followed the same understanding everybody else did. It must be the Essenes and some crazy sectarian group that existed on the western shores of the Dead Sea over there, but had no real validity to me as a Christian. Well, I've since learned quite a bit. And as I was studying the old writings, but hearing of the Dead Sea Scrolls and embracing them as evidence and a reason to it validates the extra scriptural writings, because in the Dead Sea Scrolls are all of the books of the canonized scripture except for Esther. There's some question as to why not Esther. Apparently, there was the addition. Some additional writings of Esther, but also included in there were a number of additional writings that were known as scripture in the time, and as part of some of the apocryphal writings that you'll see in the Ethiopian versions of canon and stuff, things like First Enoch and Jubilees and um, Tobit and the testimonies of the patriarchs, etc. So it seemed to be that the fact that they were um, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the caves that were found, that seemed to be a protected library from whomever this community is, the fact that they were in there seemed to give validity to them as parabiblical and rising to the level of Scripture, which also the new writings also seem to do that, as well as now I've come to know that Paul references things that you find in these extra writings, and it just, they're just references to them. Um, but admittedly, in the early days, I was hearing more about the Dead Sea Scrolls than I was learning of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And one of the purveyors, one of the folks that I listened to and heard that was Rachel Eleazar. And I even did a video I included a video on my channel where I really just introed her and then let her speak. But from her, she tells me about the validity of the scriptures and gives us a little history of what I've read in these books now. But she identifies the teacher of righteousness and the sons of light and the sons of darkness in a certain way as well. Things that I'm now going to have to push back on. And even though I'm not going to remove that video from my list because it's her opinion, but I will be pushing back because I have now done some series. I've turned my attention and I've read all the Dead Sea Scrolls now multiple times. Some of them multiple times, not the fragments, but I've read the War Scrolls in entirety at least once, and in different parts multiple times. And the same with the Damascus document and the community rules. Um, and I'm getting ready to read them again in a different version. So let me start here, and let me also say, even before I get started, that it is my goal to. I want to tell you what I'm going to do here. Is I'm going to analyze the three prevalent compilations of Dead Sea Scrolls and their authors and their introductions. I want to, maybe analyze is the wrong word, but I want to share with you what I have uh, gleaned out of these books and why am going to favor a particular compilation and why. I will share that with you so that if you're going to invest, I will point you in that direction, um, and explain that in as to why I'm doing that. But also, I want to. There are identities in these Dead Sea Scrolls. One of them is the community itself. Who is the community? History, traditionally, we're all saying the Essenes, and these guys are all saying it's the Essenes, but giving some reasons why that's not a perfect fit either, but failing to identify this group beyond that. Uh, but then they also have an identity called the Teacher of Righteousness, that they all are identifying as the founder of this Qumran community, the little community that formed there in the area of Bethabar, which is now, the current day called Qumran. So, and then there's the identity of the wicked priest. There's the identity of the Kittim. There's the identity of the sons of light and the sons of darkness. Whereas Rachel Eleazar has basically called the sons of light being those who are following the calendar identified in these Dead Sea Scrolls as the solar-based Enochian calendar that the Zadokites were using, solar-based sons of light, versus the lunar calendar that was introduced by, which is a Babylonian, to my understanding, a Babylonian calendar introduced by Greece into the land, into the priesthood, um, and into the society of Judaism in um, in around 175 BCE. But so I do want to get into those identities and juxtapose those, and that's my objective. So let me start here with going through identifying the three compilations or the three translation versions that I think are the most prevalent and certainly are the ones that I've been working from. The first one is called The Complete Dead Sea Scrolls in English by Giza Vermes. I believe this is the first one. He published it, or he did his work in 1962, in the early 60s, I believe. And then it's had many editions through the years. First published in 1962, reprinted in 1968, 75, 87, etc. It is so it's probably the oldest. I think it's probably the oldest of the options available to us, and it has an awful lot of history in here. And that's how I ended up stumbling upon it. Is I found the PDF version of some of the older editions that allowed me to do some studies and to utilize the PDFs in some of the videos I've done previously, where I was identifying, you know, in some other videos, just using their history in those videos. And the other version that I've had available, this was the first one we bought. It's called A New Translation, The Dead Sea Scrolls by Michael Wise, Martin Begg Jr., and Edward Cook. This is the first one that we obtained. My wife obtained it. And I read its foreword, and in the early days, this goes back 4 or 5 years ago, it was overwhelming to me because, it's talking about a standard model. In this book, they use terms that the others aren't using, but calling it the standard model and some different things. And there was just a lot, it was all new. So it was overwhelming. And then when I actually did just briefly start reading some of the scrolls themselves, I thought it was hard to read because I had no framework for it. So it was all difficult, and it wasn't really time for me to study it. So I put it down, but had a bit of an understanding just from it during the last 3 or 4 years as I've worked on things. So here, 4 or 5 months ago, when it became time to get serious about reading it, I admittedly I didn't really like how this read. Um, and let me just say that I think that these authors they do offer an awful lot of a forward, but in the midst of this translation, I think they are really favoring readability, which means that they've, I think, in my opinion, maybe over translated and in the process changed some of what would be the original meaning of the scriptures as intended by the authors of the scripture. Um, and then I also, as I was reading it, at every turn, there is commentary. So they're really almost telling you before they give you the scroll, they're telling you how you are to perceive it. Well, it's really not what I want to do. I want to, I want to stay as objective when I read these as possible. Because I already have my framework that I want to read them through, and I don't want everybody else influencing it and telling me what everything means. Um, so then, because this is the book that I had obtained the historical information from, again, the Complete Dead Sea Scrolls in English by Giza Vermes, that was the one I picked up and compared against the other book, and ultimately I liked how it read better. I think it was less. There was just less translation. It appeared, and it read better to me, easier to me. So at the end of the day, this is the one I favored. Bought the book, not just the PDF version. Bought the book so I could read it, and this is the one that I read through in its entirety here in recent months. Um, and it was good. It was good reading. I enjoyed it. Um, but then I started on a study of the Kittim, which led me to another alternative. Um, because the kid, all these guys are saying the Kittim are the Romans, and it's just not that simple. Um, but the study of Kittim led me to this one, the Dead Sea Scrolls translated, the Qumran text in English by Martino Garcias Martinez. Um, and the reason that this struck me, and I wish I had looked it over first, because this is one I probably would have read first to go through. And the reason this struck me is because, and I'll share with you here before I move away from these comparing the translation. I'll read a couple of passages in all three so you can kind of get a flavor of it yourself. But in the foreword and in the intentions of this author, he was trying to keep as much. He was trying to be as literal and straightforward, sticking to the actual scrolls themselves, the scripture, the writ itself, without adding. Now it's impossible. It seems impossible. So there are times that he adds in brackets some things, but it's less. He doesn't do it quite as much as either of the other two. I mean, there are blanks there. These are some of the scrolls are fairly complete, but they all have gaps and things. And so he's chosen to, when he could take multiple fragments and piece them together, he did add them, and you'll see that in brackets some. But he left a lot of blanks. If he didn't know, he didn't insert. Mostly, I should say. It's certainly less than everybody else. Um, whereas the other two did insert things that changed the meaning in at least one of the passages that I'm going to share with you. So I will say that if you are a beginner, I would say everything about this particular a beginner, meaning somebody who hasn't already invested in other books, you're going to have to pick one. I would say pick this one because it's the most succinct. The forward, it has information in there. It's got his opinions, but it's not. It's the shortest forward. It's the most succinct forward, and he does offer some commentary before some of the scrolls, some of them, but he doesn't over comment. He pretty much lets the scrolls do their own talking. And I think when you see how he translated and then how Dr. Watson then retranslated his work, I just think it's the closest thing to Scripture. It has the most closest feel to Scripture. It has I think, and then becomes more readable. So, of all the three translations, if you have not invested already, and if you're going to read, let me point you to this one. I think it will be the least troublesome, least problematic version of all of the uh, scriptures. So let me stop here, and I'll come back and I'll show you. I'm going to read from these two. I can show you a PDF and let you read along. From this one, I'm going to have to do some reading and maybe hold it up and point it at it because I don't have a good PDF. It's too new, I guess. And the PDF versions of these are the prior editions, but it's primary. It's pretty much the same with just some changes and different things that reasons why they create a second, third, fourth editions. So okay, so with that, let me get started here. So I'm going to start with the complete Dead Sea Scrolls by Gema Verses, which is the version that I read here in the last few months. And let me show you. We're going to start out with the War Scroll here, and you can see that in his translation, he's going to first give us commentary, information. Some of it's good, and if some of it's historical and good, but some of it's just opinion too in his commentary. You just have to be able to sift through and not become overly influenced by their opinions and how it might then shape your reading of the War Scroll. So when I get ready to read the War Scroll here, let me explain a few things. First of all, he's got a 1 here, an I actually, and that stands for column 1. And you won't see any verses here. In the other scriptures you will, in the other translations you will. You have to decide if you value that. I prefer to have the organization. But this is the version I read, and the next version I'll read will be the Dead Sea Scrolls, a New Translation, which is the version that I did not work from, and then I'm going to go to the version that I would have preferred. Let me make some commentary so I don't do it in the middle of it. When you see these brackets, they're inserting things, and when you see these blanks, then that they're just blanks. It was a fragment. They didn't have the information. So I'm going to try to read. Best I can. I'm going to try to read without. I'll just read it as they wrote it, as you would read it if you weren't trying to decide what was inserted and not inserted. And if I see God, the word God, like down here, I might insert the word Elohim if I think of it, because I prefer to use Elohim. So let me go ahead and read this. This first, I'm going to read from this highlighted area down to this highlighted area in all three of the versions, just so you can get a flavor of how they're set up. So column 1, for the master. Here, let me make it a little larger in case you're trying to read along. Okay, for the master, the rule. Let me start again. I'm sorry. I'm going to get rid of this. Okay. For the master, the rule of war on the unleashing of the attack of the sons of light against the company of the sons of darkness, the army of Belial, against the band of Edom, Moab, and the sons of Ammon, and against the army of the sons of the east and the Philistines, and against the bands of the Kittim of Assyria and their allies, the ungodly of the covenant. The sons of Levi, Judah, and Benjamin, the exiles in the desert, shall battle against them in all their bands when the exiled sons of light return from the desert of the peoples to camp in the desert of Jerusalem. And after the battle they shall go up from there to Jerusalem. The king of the Kittim shall enter into Egypt, and in his time he shall set out in great wrath to wage war against the kings of the north, that his fury may destroy and cut the horn of Israel. This shall be a time of salvation for the people of Elohim, an age of dominion for all the members of his company, and of everlasting destruction for all the company of Belial. The confusion of the sons of Japheth shall be great, and Assyria shall fall unsecured. The dominion of the Kittim shall come to an end, and iniquity shall be vanquished, leaving no remnant. For the sons of darkness there shall be no escape. The sons of righteousness shall shine over all the ends of the earth. They shall go on shining until the seasons of darkness are consumed, and at the season appointed by God, or Elohim, His exalted greatness shall shine eternally, to the peace, blessing, glory, joy, and long life of all the sons of light. On the day when the Kittim fall, there shall be battle, and terrible carnage before the Elohim of Israel, for that shall be the day appointed from ancient times for the battle of destruction of the sons of darkness. Okay, so let me also make another. I like it in this version. He does capitalize his whenever he thinks that the reference is to Elohim. He capitalizes it. Um, Actually, I do like it, but I also know sometimes they miscalculate. Sometimes they miscapitalize. Sometimes they. You just have to be careful. When you let them lead you into when you think it's his company versus somebody else's company. So let me pause here. Okay, and so now I'm going to read from the Dead Sea Scrolls, a new translation. And let me show you first, if you can see it. I mean, I think it's going to be hard, but it doesn't really matter. Here they're starting the War Scroll, and they've got commentary as well. Not as much as the Giza Vermes edition, but they do have commentary. And then here you can see this little italicized intro, the description of the eschatological war. They do that now. They do that over and over again. Here's another an annihilation of the sons of darkness in service to God during war years, and then the description of the banners. So they're breaking it into categories, and then they're giving you a header for it. Which okay, but in some of the other documents, when I read them, you'll see a little more description and a little more insertion of what they think that section of the scroll is all about. Now let me go ahead and turn to column one, and you can see they're listing it as column one, and then they've got the verse number. So here's column one and verse one. So let me go ahead and read that same bit of passage. You won't be able to read along with me. I'll have to read it for you, but it reads like this. For the instructor, the rule of the war. The first attack of the sons of light shall be undertaken against the forces of the sons of darkness, the army of Belial, the troops of Edom, Moab, the sons of Ammon, the Amalekites, Philistia, and the troops of the Kittim of Assyria. Supporting them are those who have violated the covenant. The sons of Levi, the sons of Judah, and the sons of Benjamin, those exiled to the wilderness, shall fight against them with blank, against all their troops, when the exiles of the sons of light return from the wilderness of the peoples to camp in the wilderness of Jerusalem. Then after the battle they shall go up from that place, and the king of the Kittim shall enter into Egypt. In his time he shall go forth with great wrath to do battle against the kings of the north, and in his anger he shall set out to destroy and eliminate the strength of Israel. Then there shall be a time of salvation for the people of Elohim, and the time of dominion for all the men of his forces, and eternal annihilation for all the forces of Belial. There shall be great panic among the sons of Japheth. Assyria shall fall with no one to come to his aid, and the supremacy of the Kittim shall cease, that wickedness be overcome without remnant. There shall be no survivors of all sons of darkness. Then the sons of righteousness shall shine to all the ends of the world, continuing to shine forth until the end of the appointed seasons of darkness. Now I realize you weren't able to read along with me, and you're probably not remembering what we just read from the complete Dead Sea Scrolls, but there's an awful lot in here where they've just to favor readability, they've translated and given us. I'm just going to say to me it's harder to read because of how they've written it, and then they've just directed. They've offered direction by the way they translated. They've offered direction of various things. Now it's not as prevalent in that passage as it might be in some others, but it's still there. Now let me pause and go to the last translation here. Okay, and now here we are in the Dead Sea Scrolls translated, the Qumran text in English. And I'll make it larger in just a second here, but you'll see here's the beginning of the War Scroll, and then they're identifying that this is the cave one copy. There are other caves where the same scroll was found in more fragmented forms. This is the most complete version of it. It gives you the identity of the cave, and I think, yeah, the Dead Sea Scrolls also did that. Both of them actually will identify the cave in the numbering system. Now they have this. They have the sections in the book, and this section is called Literature with Eschatological Content, which means end times content. And then they give us some information about what they're doing with, what they're including in this section. And this is just before the War Scroll, and they do reference the War Scroll a little bit, but there's not a lot of commentary here not related to the War Scroll. So here I'm going to show you they are breaking it. They're showing us like a new translation did. They're showing us that this is column 1, and then they're breaking it into the various verses. Like here's verse 1, 2, 3, etc. And I'm going to be reading from here to the bottom. And let me make it larger so that you can read along if you'd like. So let me get started here. Column 1, verse 1. For the instructor, the rule of the war. The first attack by the sons of light will be launched against the sons of darkness, against the army of Belial, against the company of Edom and of Moab, and of the sons of Ammon, and the company of Philistia, and against the companies of the Kittim of Ashur, and those who assist them from among the wicked of the covenant. The sons of Levi, the sons of Judah, the sons of Benjamin, the exiled of the desert, will wage war against them, against all their companies, when the exiled sons of light return from the desert of the peoples to camp in the desert of Jerusalem. And after the war, they shall go up from there, of the Kittim in Egypt. And in his time, he will go out with great rage to wage war against the kings of the north, and his anger will exterminate and cut off the horn of . There will follow a time of salvation for the people of Elohim, and a period of rule for all the men of his lot, and everlasting destruction for all the lot of Belial. There will be great panic among the sons of Japheth. Ashur shall fall, and there shall be no help for him. The rule of the Kittim will come to an end, wickedness having been defeated, with no remnant remaining, and there will be no escape. There will be no escape for the sons of darkness. And the sons of justice shall shine in all the edges of the earth. They shall go on illuminating up to the end of all the periods of darkness. So clearly, that's not necessarily easy to read, but I think it's more succinct and it appears to have less influence. Let me show you how I think the literal approach has meaning when you are working with these translations and where they're over inserting and over translating. When I was doing a study of the Kittim, first of all of them are identifying the Kittim of Ashur. And they're all also saying, and when you get into Daniel, you understand that the Kittim, the ships of Kittim would be Rome. And I agree with that. But here you've got Kittim being identified as the Kittim of Ashur. And you have in the Maccabees, the Kittim being described as Chaldeans, Babylonians. And I'm going to do, when I turn my attention and when I share the whole Kittim research that I did, I agree with Giza Vermes' approach that really the Kittim is just the powerful of the land at the time, or something similar to that. But as I was studying this, we also have Kittim in Egypt. So in addition to Ashur, Babylonia, or the Chaldeans, and Rome, we also have Kittim in Egypt. And there was a time that, if there was a time that the power brokers of the earth were in Egypt, and there may be a time in the future where the same is true. But the point would be, when you're reading this, and it reads, and after the war they shall go up from there, of the Kittim in Egypt. So that leaves you thinking that Kittim, part of the, in Egypt, is Kittim. there are groups of Kittim. And it makes sense because we have this king of the north. And in his time, he will go out with great rage to wage war against the kings of the north. And who would be the Kittim of Egypt? So, and in his time, he will go out with great rage to wage war against the kings of the north. Well, if you understand who the Assyrians were, which are the Kittim of Ashur, then you know that they are the north. Babylon, Chaldeans, Ashur, these are the Kittim of the north. And if you know where the Kittim of Rome is, that would be to the west. So when the Kittim in Egypt, if they're going to launch out in great rage against the kings of the north, it would be like the Kittim in Egypt waging war against the Kittim of Ashur. Makes sense. Let me show you how it reads in the complete Dead Sea Scroll, which is, I will just tell you without turning there. This is how it reads. Well, I will turn there. Let me show you how it reads. Here it is. Let me get it highlighted. Okay. So the king, after identifying the Kittim of Assyria up here, which would be kings to the north, in my opinion, then it goes on to say down here, the king of the Kittim shall enter into Egypt. So the way they, first of all, this bracket is telling you they've inserted this. And that's why in this version, they didn't insert anything. They left it blank. Because that's, the scroll didn't insert that information that they did. So by inserting the king of the Kittim shall enter, they're making it appear that this king of the Kittim, they've just spoken of the king of Assyria, and they're making it sound like the king of the Kittim, which would be the king of the Assyrians, shall enter into Egypt. So this king of Assyria goes down into Egypt, and in his time he shall set out in great wrath to wage war against the kings of the north. Well, I guess if you're trying to figure this out, it's a little difficult because who's the kings of the north? I think it's the Kittim of Assyria. So it doesn't really make sense how this is written. And let me pause for a second and then go. Okay, I'm not going to show it to you because I can't get it up on PDF, but I'm going to read a new translation, the Dead Sea Scrolls, on how it reads. It reads like this: Then after the battle, they shall go up from that place, and the king of the Kittim shall enter into Egypt. In his time he shall go forth with great wrath to do battle against the kings of the north. Then after the battle, where does it say after the battle? The sons of... Okay, and after the battle they shall go up from there to Jerusalem. And so that basically it's reading pretty much, it's translated, it's more translated into English, into readable English than this is, but it does also insert the king of and the king of the Kittim shall enter into Egypt. So they're doing the same thing, which changes, in my opinion, the meaning and gives validity to this idea that I want to read from a version that does less inserting of other non-data that they think would fill in the blanks. And I don't want them to fill in the blanks for me, is what I'm really saying. And I think we have a better chance of them not filling in the blanks in the Dead Sea Scrolls translated, and that's why I'm valuing that version. Okay, let me just go off to here. Okay, and to finish up this segment, I'm just going to read from the Damascus document, the first paragraph or two, just to compare again, so you can see a comparison. And here I am in the complete Dead Sea Scrolls by Giza Vermes, and you can see that he's offered again a commentary before we begin. And let me get to the beginning. Here's the exhortation. Okay, so we're going to start with the exhortation here, and then make it larger so you can read along if you want to. Let's see, I'm going to read down to, let me pause and see where I want to read to. Okay, and so the exhortation. Listen now, all you who know righteousness, and consider the works of Elohim, for he has a dispute with all flesh, and will condemn all those who despise him. For when they were unfaithful and forsook him, he hid his face from Israel and his sanctuary, and delivered them up to the sword. But remembering the covenant of the forefathers, He left a remnant to Israel and did not deliver it up to be destroyed. And in the age of wrath, 390 years after he had given them into the hand of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, he visited them, and he caused a plant root to spring from Israel and Aaron to inherit his land and to prosper on the good things of his earth. And they perceived their iniquity and recognized that they were guilty men, yet for 20 years they were like blind men groping for the way. And Elohim observed their deeds, that they sought him with a whole heart, and he raised for them a teacher of righteousness to guide them in the way of his heart. And he made known to the latter generations that which Elohim had done to the latter generation, the congregation of traitors, to those who departed from the way. This was the time of which it is written, like a stubborn heifer, thus was Israel stubborn. Hosea chapter 4, verse 16. Okay, let me go over to read the same in the Dead Sea Scrolls translated. Again, there's no intro, no commentary here. Let me make it a little bit larger, and we'll read the same spot. And okay, so we have blank, column 1, blank. And now listen, all those who know justice and understand the actions of Elohim, for he has dispute with all flesh and will carry out judgment on all those who spurn him. For when they were unfaithful in forsaking him, he hid his face from Israel and from his sanctuary and delivered them up to the sword. However, when he remembered the covenant of the very first, he saved a remnant for Israel and did not deliver them up to destruction. And at the moment of wrath, 390 years after having delivered them into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, he visited them and caused to sprout from Israel and from Aaron a shoot of the planting, in order to possess his land and to become fat with the good things of his soil. And they realized their sin and knew that they were guilty men. But they were like blind persons and like those who grope for the path over 20 years. And Elohim appraised their deeds because they sought him with a perfect heart, and raised up for them a teacher of righteousness in order to direct them in the path of his heart. Okay. Oops, and let me finish. And he made known to the last generations what he had done for the last generation, the congregation of traitors. These are the ones who stray from the path. This is the time about which it has been written. This is the time about which it has been written in Hosea 4:16, like a stray heifer, so has Israel strayed, when the scoffer arose who scattered the waters of lies over Israel. Okay. Let me pause. Okay, and now let me finish up with the same passage and situation in a new translation of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Let me first show you that again. They have commentary, which is, I guess, fine, but you just have to be careful with it. And then they get into the exhortation, and they have commentary at the beginning, and it reads like this: only fragments remain of the opening paragraphs of the Damascus document. The translation that follows is pieced together from 4Q 266 and 4Q 268, which is a specific cave. Enough can be recovered to tell that several of the themes of the entire work are foreshadowed in the introductory paragraphs. The necessity of obedience to Elohim, the perfidy of the wicked, the insight of the pious into the future, the importance of observing the proper times of worship, and special revelation given to the children of light. The portion probably comes from the sectarian document. Well, let me just make comments to that. That's a lot of information, but this just adds more to read when you're already trying to read so much. I don't think we need all their commentary. And another thing that they've done here is they've introduced first this fragmented copy. There is, and then they go into here in the Geniza A, column 1, which is where you're going to see there is a fairly coherent, non-fragmented copy that the other two translations offer first, because it is the most, from the beginning to the end, it's the most solid reading you can find. By putting this, and then they follow up with this fragment that they're showing here. They follow up with that at the end so that you can then see, after reading the complete narrative of the Damascus document, then you can go into the fragments they're fragments. So when you read them, they're disruptive. Well, in this book, they start with that fragment, and you can't really read this. You can see there are so many blanks in there, you can't really read it, but they offer this first. And I'm not sure that I'm not sure. I'd have to pay more attention to it, but really, um, it's just disruptive. Here on the next page, and after some more commentary, where it says the epigraph. This epigraph sets the tone for what is to follow, an exposition of how Elohim punishes the wicked while leaving a righteous remnant to live exemplary lives. The Geniza manuscript A begins at this point. All right, so they've just added some more for you to read, and then they're going to start sharing what we just read from the other two without all of this noise to begin with. So let me go ahead and read how they wrote this. Geniza A, column 1. So listen, all you who recognize righteousness, and consider the deeds of Elohim. When he has a dispute with any mortal, he passes judgment on those who spurn him. Okay. And then they cut in and say, and give you more commentary, a description of Israel's sin resulting in exile and God's mercy on the generation that returned from exile. That's disruptive, in my opinion. And then he continues with the document, with the scroll. For when Israel abandoned him by being faithless, he turned away from Israel and from his sanctuary and gave them up to the sword. But when he called to mind the covenant he made with their forefathers, he left a remnant for Israel and did not allow them to be exterminated. In the era of wrath, 300, 390 years at the time he handed them over to the power of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, he took care of them and caused to grow from Israel and from Aaron a root of planting to inherit his land and to grow fat on the good produce of his soil. They considered their iniquity, and they knew that they were guilty men, and had been like the blind and like those groping for the way 20 years. But Elohim considered their deeds, that they had sought him with a whole heart, and so he raised up for them a teacher of righteousness to guide them in the way of his heart. He taught to later generations what Elohim did to the generation deserving wrath, a company of traitors. They are the ones who depart from the proper way. That is the time of which it was written, like a rebellious cow, so rebelled Israel. Hosea 4:16. Okay. Everybody choose what you would like, but that's harder to read for me. First of all, it's very disruptive, and then they've over translated. I think the true Dead Sea Scrolls get lost in this effort of translation. I think Giza Vermes did better, but there are things that detract from it too. Maybe over commentary, and then under notating where we're at in the scriptures, etc., and then over inserting as well. Maybe. And then finally, I think we get to this, which is not a perfect translation either. It has some commentary, but it's minimized commentary, minimized insertion of, in areas that were left blank, and minimized interpretation or translating for us. So, in my opinion, this is the translation to pick up and work from, and this is what I'm getting ready. I'm getting ready to put the other two down. This will be the study book that I'm going to be using, and I'm just going to tell you this is the one I'm going to use going forward for our purposes of identifying the various identities within the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this ends this section of